Well, hello, friends! Today is Monday, June 10th, 2019. Welcome back to A Garden Named Bill. Yep, I'm back. I had a wonderful time in Germany. I was in the city of Hamburg, which is in the northernmost part of Germany, for a little over a week. I was at the Rotary International Annual Convention, and it was really spectacular. I got to play tourist by myself a little bit ahead of time and then enjoy the convention. And while I was gone, the garden did some growing. Let's take a look at our overview. So the timing of this overview shot today is a little bit off. The sun is just risen, and I'm afraid we're going to have to kind of fudge it with my hand here. But sort of over here a little bit more, we got tons of raspberry growth, which we'll get to in a little bit. The peas are about 5 feet tall. That's where they should be for this time of year. Even though I planted them earlier, they're still about where they were last year. That's because we've had such cool weather. That's going to be a theme, is a lot of things are not where I would like them to be because we've had such cool weather. But peas are climbing. I already harvested a bunch of stuff, which we'll go over in a little bit. Well, one of the things that I need to do this week is go through again and pull up more raspberries. Before I left, I pulled everything up that I didn't want, that I wasn't sharing with people, and I got rid of it. And yet, with all of the rain that we had while I was gone, more have sprung up. So I need to get rid of these and do just a little bit of weeding again. All of the assorted gourd hillages that I planted before I left have germinated, and they're pretty dense, so I'm going to decide whether I'm going to pull a few of these out or just encourage them to spread out. Haven't really thought of it, but I planted a lot of seeds because they were old seed packets, thinking that not all of them would germinate, and a lot of them germinated, so I need to thin this out. Well, I would describe my potatoes here as out of this world. Doing really, really wonderfully. I mean, look at how marvelous these are. This week, it's been 40 days since I planted these, and I want to give them a feeding. So in the original How to Plant Potatoes video that I did beginning of May, somebody in the comments section suggested that I do a lasagna technique, where instead of just adding more leaf mulch on top of this, I add a layer of compost and then some mulch on top of it. And I think that's what I'm going to do. So on to highlights. Here are the carrots. And they are growing very, very nicely. And as we zoom out a little bit and focus with the sun, you can see the beets on the right are growing well. And where are the radishes? Well, that was one of the first things I did after I got home at the end of last week. I harvested all of the radishes. Bridget had taken a few of them while I was gone and eaten them, as she should. And they were all ready to go. They did so well this year. You know, the planting time was perfect, and they just had a great medium to grow in. All of the radishes, I ended up, I cut off the greens and I cut off the taproot, and I just stored them in plastic bags in the refrigerator with a damp towel. That was the best recommendation that I saw online, to keep them for a couple weeks fresh in the fridge. If I wanted to do it longer, I was thinking maybe I could store them in sand somewhere in like the cellar, but I decided to opt against that. And then all the greens for it, I turned into radish pesto, and it is spicy and it is delicious, and it feels great here at the beginning of June to be using stuff for actual meals. The onions are grown, and you can see they've got their heads that are forming, and they're getting so heavy that they're tipping. So that's what Egyptian walking onions do. The cauliflower is humongous. It's well over a foot wide, each of them. And behind the cauliflower, see if it'll focus, there we go. Those are the cucumbers. They all germinated, and they should start climbing that trellis soon. Over here we already talked about the potatoes, but I'll zoom in so you can see. Really, really very gorgeous. They're about a foot tall, a little over a foot tall, and Oh, there's Norman the gnome, just chilling out, protecting the potatoes. Well, the weakest part of the garden here, without a doubt, is the pepper and tomato section. These guys just like the heat and humidity of summer, and we have not had those days. I was looking back at my garden tours from years past. Last year, the tomatoes and peppers were all about this tall already because we had days in the 80s and 90s and lots of humidity prolonged. And this year it's been the opposite. We've had a lot of days in the 60s and 70s, cool weather with rain. And these particular crops just aren't having it. And it makes me sad. The asparagus bed looks really nice. I mean, look at this nifty fern, you know. But they're coming up everywhere, as it should. And this year they will all just grow and fill in. There's a lot of weeds in there too, so I guess that's a week ahead task. I just want to weed this particular bed. And hey, check this out. Some things that you just get to experience firsthand. Look at that. My pane here shattered into a million pieces of glass. That's great. To clean that up. I wonder what happened last night. Nobody comes in here and vandalizes. I mean, the rest of this property is fine. The wind probably picked it up and then smashed it back on there. I don't know, maybe a squirrel fell through. There's no blood. Great! So that's another week ahead task. Clean up the frame. But what the frame was protecting early on, the spinach, is mostly all gone, except for this little bit here, which we're harvesting fresh. But here and in the other barrel, was another thing that I did this past weekend. I cleaned them all out because most of it had started bolting, and I took all of them and I clipped off the leaves from the stem, composted the stems, and then all of the leaves I washed and I dried in the spinner and with some paper towel and put them in a freezer bag and froze it. So we'll be using that hopefully throughout the spring and summer. The zucchini plants are doing quite nicely. I ended up keeping both seeds, so we'll see if that was a terrible idea because of root nutrient competition, or if it just turns out fine and one plant spills out over here and one plant spills out over here. But you'll notice two different kinds of leaves. There's one right here and one right here. It was kind of a spur-of-the-moment thing before I left, but I planted two mammoth sunflower seeds on either end, thinking that those will just grow up like this and the zucchini can go around it. Might look really cool. It might not happen, but that's part of the beauty and joy of gardening, is you can experiment with that and just see what works. This time last year, man, the corn was it was huge already. Again, it's all that heat. I think it was well over a foot this time last year. Now it's just about, I don't know, 4 inches, 4 or 5 inches, maybe some of the bigger ones. But all of the reseeding that I did before I left was successful. Along the back edge here, I did some reseeding for those mammoth sunflowers, and when I counted yesterday, there were 11 of them, it looks like. Well, that's a little flattened from the wind. But overall, I mean, we're going to get some. It won't be a solid wall of sunflowers like I wanted it to be, but that's okay. Well, moving from the annual section through the gate and arch over into the perennial fruit. Here, oh, hello, crooked camera. I wanted to let you know that this is another thing that I did last week. You can see how much I thinned this out. I went through and I harvested 6 pounds of rhubarb from this plant and the other, and in just 2 days' time, the phototropism has bent up a lot of the leaves to fill in the space from all of the different shoots that I had picked. Really is great. So now I leave the rhubarb for the rest of the summer because it really doesn't like the hot and heat of the summer. Let it photosynthesize energy, put it into the root, and then maybe harvest another third of it, so 4 pounds or so, in the fall, and then it'll just die back to the ground. So good job, rhubarb. All of that stuff that we processed we'll be using throughout the summer in jams and kombucha and other tasty things. The gooseberries are wonderful. They're monstrous. They are marble size now, and I have to double check when I should be harvesting these. I think I waited a little bit too long last year, so this year I will be harvesting them on the earlier side. They're nice and tart, and I can't wait to start baking with them. I think this shot is just so cool. This is the raspberry section at the hedge, and these particular raspberries are from my buddy Jim, the Midwest gardener. But you can see all the flower heads here are perked up. And on each of these little sections that we had zoomed into, there's anywhere from 8 to 12 actual buds. The bumblebees are just bzzz in here during the heat of the day. It really is spectacular. But that's thousands of raspberries essentially in just this cluster from Jim alone, let alone everything else that's down here. All of my normal raspberries are the same thing. They put on their buds in a little different manner. They're more inside as opposed to on the top. But they have, probably 5 or 6 buds per cluster, but more clusters in general throughout on all the greenage. Historically, I will start harvesting these at the end of June or first week of July. The final in-garden highlight here is without a doubt the currant. When I planted it, it was maybe this tall, and all of this green growth has happened in just the last 2 months. So it took to my area beautifully, just like the gooseberry did 3 years ago, and I knew this currant was going to. So it just fills me with joy that by 2021 I'm going to have a bunch of early red currants to eat and cook with. Should be super, super, super exciting, but this growth is beautiful and very encouraging to see. Yeah, well, aside from the wonkiness of the sun, it felt great to get out and look at the camera and talk to you guys today. Wonderful to be home. How are your gardens faring? Has the weather been hot or cold or wet or dry or what? I guess the weather has worked really well for my potatoes, exceptionally well for my root vegetables and other cold hardy crops, and just not as well for some of my heat-loving things like the peppers and tomatoes, and maybe the corn. But overall, I'm pleased with stuff in the garden, and I can't wait to see how everything grows once the weather really kicks up this month. I didn't show you the trees outside here, but in the last week, I want to say that the apple tree has got a foot of growth on it instead of the 4 inches before I left. So the McIntosh, the peach, the Bartlett pear are all taller than I am now. My babies are growing up. It's so exciting. That's it. Thanks a lot for watching. Happy gardening, etc., etc. See you next week.